Coming at you live from the beautiful heartland of these good old United States of America, right at the confluence of the mighty Mississippi and the majestic Missouri rivers, St. Charles, Missouri. This is the Rant. I am your host, Charles Lamson, and I shall be with you for the next 2 hours. Let's see here. Today is Wednesday, or shoot, is it? No, it's Thursday. Thursday, November the 14th, year of our Lord 2019. Today's topic, I'm going to be doing another economic and financial review, in which first half of the big show, we're going to have a seance, as usual. And I'm going to summon forth, I'm going to use my powers as a practitioner of the black arts and necromancer and whatnot, medium, powerful spiritual medium, to summon forth the spirit of Alfred Marshall. He's going to come from the depths of hell, from the spirit realm, as it were. Okay. The screen makes me look like I have barbecue. Okay, anyway. All right. So, yeah, we're gonna summon his spirit from the depths of hell, economist hell, and he's gonna talk about his principles of economics with us via a female spiritual medium. So, if you're wondering why Alfred Marshall sounds like a woman, that's why. Females often make the best mediums, as is well known in occult circles, ladies and gentlemen. So, yeah, and we're going to leave her name out of it, just, to protect her. So, a lot of people don't like being associated with black magic and the occult and whatnot, and who can blame them? So, all right. Then we're going to, while I'm doing that, we're going to have motivational, inspirational, disabled guy, 50-year-old disabled guy, instructional fitness video. So today, I'm just going to be using 8-pound dumbbells. Going to be going right from the chair here. I'm just going to recline, do some bench presses, and when I tire of that, gonna go ahead and sit up, and then we're gonna do some incline bench, some flies, incline bench, or military press, whatever you want to call it. All using 8-pound dumbbells. Gonna try and keep it going for about 45, 50 minutes. Doing as many sets as possible, and then just taking breaks in between sets. Pretty quick breaks, just counting 30 respirations, which is roughly about 60 seconds. So, going to be doing that first half. Then, that's going to be my sacrifice, as it were, for the black magic ritual. I'm not into killing shit in my black magic rituals, so I tend to do things like, cut myself, or I'm just joking, all right, but, anyway. So, I'm gonna close that seance with a banishing ritual. We're gonna send Alfred Marshall's spirit straight back to hell where he belongs. And then the second half of the show, we're gonna take some calls. Caller lines will be open. Don't try to call during the first half because you'll just be waiting. But if you want to call it early, get in line. That's cool too. But I won't be taking any calls till the second half. And that number is, so you might want to write that down. That number be 657-383-1825. That's 657-383-1825. Again, don't call during, wait till the second half, the second hour. I'll take calls. And also, I will be doing timely top stories in the world of finance. So give us a call, be a part of the show. Tell your family, tell your friends. It's going to be a wild ride, ladies and gentlemen. Wild ride. Woo! Okay. You ready? All right, Alfred. Alfred, are you there? Alfred's spirit is waiting in the green room. Green room. Restlessly waiting in the green. Alfred, please talk to us. Alfred, please, brother.
Oh, our own more easy course. The change may perhaps be regarded as a passing onward from that early stage in the development of scientific method, in which the operations of nature are represented as conventionally simplified for the purpose of enabling them to be described in short and easy sentences, to that higher stage in which they are studied more carefully and represented more nearly as they are, even at the expense of some loss of simplicity and definiteness, and even apparent lucidity. And in consequence, general reasoning in economics has made more rapid progress and established a firmer position in this generation in which it is subject to hostile criticism at every step than it was when at the height of its popularity, and its authority was seldom challenged. So far, we have looked at recent progress from the point of view of England only. But progress in England has been only one side of a broader movement which has extended over the whole Western world. Section 8. English economists have had many followers and many critics in foreign countries. The French school has had a continuous development from its own great thinkers in the 18th century and has avoided many errors and confusions, particularly with regard to wages, which have been common among the second rank of English economists. From the time of Say downwards, it has done a great deal of useful work. In Cournot, it has had a constructive thinker of the highest genius, while Fourier, Saint-Simon, Proudhon, and Louis Blanc have made many of the most valuable, as well as many of the wildest suggestions of socialism. The greatest relative advance during recent years is perhaps that which has been made by America. A generation ago, the American school of economists was supposed to consist of the group of protectionists who follow Carey's lead. But new schools of vigorous thinkers are now growing up, and there are signs that America is on the way to take the same leading position in economic thought that she has already taken in economic practice. Economic science is showing signs of renewed vigor in two of its old homes, Holland and Italy, and more especially is the vigorous analytical work of the Austrian economists attracting much attention in all countries. But on the whole, the most important economic work that has been done on the continent in recent times is that of Germany. While recognizing the leadership of Adam Smith, the German economists have been irritated more than any others by what they have regarded as the insular narrowness and self-confidence of the Ricardian school. In particular, they resented the way in which the English advocates of free trade tacitly assumed that a proposition which had been established with regard to a manufacturing country, such as England was, could be carried over without modification to agricultural countries. The brilliant genius and national enthusiasm of Liszt overthrew this presumption and showed that the requirements
Wait a
little
minute.
account of the indirect effects of free trade.
I heard this just the other
No
day.
great harm might be done in neglecting
For some
them
reason.
so far as England
Okay,
was
wait a minute,
concerned,
Alfred, wait a
there
minute,
they were in the
wait just a damn minute. That was, yeah, I remember that from last show, or I'm having deja vu, but I'm pretty sure that was in the last show. Okay, so I'm gonna fast forward a little bit here. We're basically we're sort of reaching the end of Principles of Economics. We're in the appendix section. By the way, this is just Principles of Economics. It's like how many? It's like 7 different books, so it's pretty damn long. And then so the appendix section itself is very long as well. But let's see here. I know I listened to this last show, so I don't know how things weren't queued up properly. So let's fast forward to right here. and then let's take it from here. All right, Alfred, are you there? Talk to us, brother. Talk to us.
Of import duties, but such lists are frankly artificial. It is the spirit and not the letter of economic tradition which we should be most careful to
Let's
preserve.
see.
And as was suggested at the end of Book 2, Chapter 4, no intelligent writer has ever left out of the account either the side of prospectiveness or that of productiveness. But some have enlarged more on the one side and others on the other,
Okay.
while on either side difficulty has been found in drawing a definite line of
I
demarcation.
just tried.
Let us then look at the notion of capital as a store of things, the result of human efforts and sacrifices, devoted mainly to securing benefits in the future rather than in the present. The notion itself is definite, but it does not lead to a definite classification, just as the notion of length is definite, but yet does not enable us to divide off long walls from short walls save by an arbitrary rule. The savage shows some perspectiveness when he puts together branches of trees to protect him for a night. He shows more when he makes a tent of poles and skins, and yet more when he builds a wooden hut. The civilized man shows increasing perspectiveness when he substitutes solid houses of brick or stone for wooden shanties. A line could be drawn anywhere to mark off those things, the production of which shows a great desire for future satisfactions rather than present, but it would be artificial and unstable. Those who have sought one have found themselves on an inclined plane and have not reached a stable resting place till they have included all accumulated wealth as capital. This logical result was faced by many French economists who, following the lines laid down by the physiocrats, used the term capital very much in the sense in which Adam Smith and his immediate followers used the word stock, to include all accumulated wealth, valeur accumulée, i.e., all the result of the excess of production over consumption. And although in recent years they have shown a decided tendency to use the term in the narrower English sense, there is at the same time a considerable movement on the part of some of the profoundest thinkers in Germany and England in the direction of the older and broader French definition. Especially has this been remarkable in writers who, like Turgot, have been inclined towards mathematical modes of thought, among whom Hermann, Jevons, Walras, and Professors Pareto and Fischer are conspicuous. The writings of Professor Fischer contain a masterly argument, rich in fertile suggestion, in favor of a comprehensive use of the term. Regarded from the abstract and mathematical point of view, his position is incontestable, but he seems to take too little account of the necessity for keeping realistic discussions in touch with the language of the marketplace, and to ignore Bejo's caution against trying to express various meanings on complex things with a scanty vocabulary of fastened uses. Most of the attempts to define capital rigidly, whether in England or other countries, have turned mainly on its productivity, to the comparative neglect of its prospectivity. They have regarded social capital as a means for acquisition, Erwerk's capital, or as a stock of the requisites of production, Produktionsmittelvorrat. But this general notion has been treated in different ways. According to the older English traditions, capital consists of those things which aid or support labor in production, or, has been said more recently, it consists of those things without which production could not be carried on with equal efficiency, but which are not free gifts of nature. It is from this point of view that the distinction already noticed between consumption capital and auxiliary capital has been made. This view of capital has been suggested by the affairs of the labor market, but it has never been perfectly consistent. For it has been made to include as capital everything which employers directly or indirectly provide in payment for the work of their employees, wage capital or remuneratory capital as it is called, but yet not to include any of the things needed for their own support, or that of architects, engineers, and other professional men. But to be consistent, it should have included the necessaries for efficiency of all classes of workers, and it should have excluded the luxuries of the manual labor classes as well as of other workers. If, however, it had been pushed to this logical conclusion, it would have played a less prominent part in the discussion over the relations of employers and employed. In some countries, however, and especially in Germany and Austria, there has been some tendency to combine capital, from the social point of view, to auxiliary or instrumental capital. It is argued that in order to keep clear the contrast between production and consumption, Nothing which enters directly into consumption should be regarded as a means to production. But there appears no good reason why a thing should not be regarded in twofold capacity. It is further argued that those things which render their services to man not directly, but through the part which they play in preparing other things for his use, form a compact class, because their value is derived from that of the things which they help to produce. There is much to be said for having a name for this group, but there is room for doubt whether capital is a good name for it, and also for doubt whether the group is as compact as it appears at first sight. Thus we may define instrumental goods so as to exclude tramways and other things which derive their value from the personal services which they render, or we may follow the example of the old use of the phrase productive labor, and insist that those things only are properly to be regarded as instrumental goods, the work of which is directly embodied in a material product. The former definition brings this use of the term rather close to that discussed in the last section, and shares with it the demerit of vagueness. The latter is a little more definite, but seems to make an artificial distinction where nature has made none, and to be as unsuitable for scientific purposes as the old definitions of productive labor. To conclude, from the abstract point of view, the French definition, advocated by Professor Fisher and others, holds the field without a rival. A man's coat is a stored-up product of past efforts and sacrifices, destined as a means to provide him with future gratifications, just as much as a factory is, while both yield immediate shelter from the weather. And if we are seeking a definition that will keep realistic economics in touch with the marketplace, then careful account needs to be taken of the aggregate volume of those things which are regarded as capital in the marketplace and do not fall within the limits assigned to intermediate products. In case of doubt, that course is to be preferred which is most in accordance with tradition. These were the considerations which led to the adoption of the twofold definition of capital, from the business and the social point of view, given above. End of Appendix E. Appendix F of Principles of Economics. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Principles of Economics by Alfred Marshall. Appendix F. Barter. Let us consider the case of two individuals engaged in barter. A has, say, a basket of apples, B a basket of nuts. A wants some nuts, B wants some apples. The satisfaction which B would get from one apple would perhaps outweigh that which he would lose by parting with 12 nuts, while the satisfaction which A would get from perhaps 3 nuts would outweigh that which he would lose by parting with 1 apple. The exchange will be started somewhere between these two rates, but if it goes on gradually, every apple that A loses will increase the marginal utility of apples to him and make him more unwilling to part with any more, while every additional nut that he gets will lower the marginal utility of nuts to him and diminish his eagerness for more, and vice versa with B. At last, A's eagerness for nuts relatively to apples will no longer exceed B's, and exchange will cease because any terms that the one is willing to propose would be disadvantageous to the other. Up to this point, exchange has increased the satisfaction on both sides, but it can do so no further. Equilibrium has been attained, but really it is not the equilibrium, it is an accidental equilibrium. There is, however, one equilibrium rate of exchange which has some sort of right to be called the true equilibrium rate, because if once hit upon it would be adhered to throughout. It is clear that if very many nuts were to be given throughout for an apple, B would be willing to do but little business, while if but very few were to be given, A would be willing to do but little. There must be some intermediate rate at which they would be willing to do business to the same extent. Suppose that this rate is 6 nuts for an apple, and that A is willing to give 8 apples for 48 nuts, while B is willing to receive 8 apples at that rate, but that A would not be willing to give a 9th apple for another 6 nuts, while B would not be willing to give another 6 nuts for a 9th apple. This, then, is the true position of equilibrium, but there is no reason to suppose that it will be reached in practice. Suppose, for instance, that A's basket had originally 20 apples in it and B's 100 nuts, and that A at starting induced B to believe that he does not care much to have any nuts, and so manages to barter 4 apples for 40 nuts, and afterwards 2 more for 17 nuts, and afterwards 1 more for 8. Equilibrium may now have been reached, but there may be no further exchange which is advantageous to both. A has 65 nuts and does not care to give another apple even for 8, while B, having only 35 nuts, sets a high value on them and will not give as many as 8 for another apple. On the other hand, if B had been the more skillful in bargaining, he might have perhaps induced A to give 6 apples for 15 nuts, and then 2 more for 7. A has now given up 8 apples and got 22 nuts. If the terms at starting had been 6 nuts for an apple and he had got 48 nuts for his 8 apples, he would not have given up another apple even for 7 nuts. But having so few nuts, he is anxious to get more, and is willing to give 2 more apples in exchange for 8 nuts, and then 2 more for 9 nuts, and then 1 more for 5, and then again equilibrium may be reached. For B, having 13 apples and 56 nuts, does not perhaps care to give more than 5 nuts for an apple, and A may be unwilling to give up one of his few remaining apples for less than 6. In both these cases, the exchange would have increased the satisfaction of both as far as it went, and when it ceased, no further exchange would have been possible which would not have diminished the satisfaction of at least one of them. In each case, an equilibrium rate would have been reached, but it would be an arbitrary equilibrium. Next, suppose that there are 100 people in a similar position to that of A, each with about 20 apples and the same desire for nuts as A, and an equal number on the other side similarly situated to the original B. Then the acutest bargainers in the market would probably be some of them on A's side, some of them on B's, and whether there was free communication throughout the market or not, the mean of the bargains would not be so likely to differ very widely from the rate of 6 nuts for an apple, as in the case of barter between 2 people. But yet there would be no such strong probability of its adhering very closely to that rate, as we saw was the case in the corn market. It would be quite possible for those on the A side to get in various degrees the better of those on the B side in bargaining, so that after a time 6,500 nuts might have been exchanged for 700 apples, and then those on the A side, having so many nuts, might be unwilling to do any more trade except at the rate of at least 8 nuts for an apple, while those on the B side, having only 35 nuts apiece left on the average, might probably refuse to part with any more at that rate. On the other hand, B's might have gotten in various degrees the better of the A's in bargaining, with the result that after a time 1,300 apples had been exchanged for only 4,400 nuts. The B's, having then 1,300 apples and 5,600 nuts, might be unwilling to offer more than 5 nuts for an apple, while the A's, having only 7 apples apiece left on the average, might decline that rate. In the one case, equilibrium would be found at a rate of 8 nuts for an apple, and in the other at the rate of 5 nuts. In each case, an equilibrium would be attained, but not the equilibrium. This uncertainty of the rate at which equilibrium is reached depends indirectly on the fact that one commodity is being bartered for another instead of being sold for money. For since money is a general purchasing medium, there are likely to be many dealers who can conveniently take in or give out large supplies of it, and this tends to steady the market. But where barter prevails, apples are likely to be exchanged for nuts in one case, for fish in another, for arrows in another, and so on. The steadying influences which hold together a market in which values are set in money are absent, and we are obliged to regard the marginal utilities of all commodities as varying. It is, however, true that, if nut growing had been a chief industry of our barter district, and all the traders on both sides had large stores of nuts, while only the A's had apples, then the exchange of a few handfuls of nuts would not have visibly affected their stores, or changed appreciably the marginal utility of nuts. In that case, the bargaining would have resembled in all fundamentals the buying and selling in an ordinary corn market. Thus, for instance, let a single A with 20 apples bargain with a single B. Let A be willing to sell 5 apples for 15 nuts, a 6th for 4 nuts, a 7th for 5, an 8th for 6, a 9th for 7th, and so on, the marginal utility of nuts being always constant to him, so that he is just willing to sell the 8th for 6th, and so on, whether in the earlier part of the trade he has got the better of the bargaining with B or not. Meanwhile, let B be willing to pay 50 nuts for the first 5 apples, rather than go without them, 9 for a 6th, 7 for a seventh, 6 for an eighth, and only 5 for a ninth, the marginal utility of nuts being constant to him, so that he will give just 6 nuts for the eighth apple, whether he has bought the earlier apples cheaply or not. In this case, the bargaining must issue in the transfer of 8 apples, the eighth apple being given for 6 nuts. But of course, if A had got the better of the bargaining at first, he might have got 50 or 60 nuts for the first 7 apples, while if B had got the better of the bargaining at first, he might have got the first 7 apples for 30 or 40 nuts. This corresponds to the fact that in the corn market discussed in the text, about 700 quarters would be sold with a final rate of 36 shillings, but if the sellers had got the best of the bargaining at first, the aggregate price paid might be a good deal more than 700 times 36 shillings, while if the buyers had got the better of the bargaining at first, the aggregate price would be a good deal less than 700 times 36 shillings. The real distinction, then, between the theory of buying and selling and that of barter is that in the former it generally is, and in the latter it generally is not, right to assume that the stock of one of the things which is in the market and ready to be exchanged for the other is very large and in many hands, and that therefore its marginal utility is practically constant. See Note 12, bis, in the mathematical appendix. End of Appendix F.
Appendix G of Principles of Economics. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Principles of Economics by Alfred Marshall. Appendix G. Title: The Incidence of Local Rates, with some suggestions as to policy. We have seen, note 65, that the incidence of a new local tax on printing would differ from that of a national tax, mainly by causing such parts of the local printing industry as could conveniently migrate beyond the boundaries of the local tax to do so. Those customers who needed their printing to be done in the locality would pay rather higher for it. Compositors would migrate till only enough remained to find employment locally at about the same wages as before, and some printing offices would be transferred to other industries. The incidence of general local rates on immovable property follows different lines in some respects. The power of migration beyond the boundaries of the rates is a very important factor here, as in the case of a local tax on printing. But of perhaps even greater importance is the fact that a large part of the local rates is spent in ways that conduce directly to the comfort of those very residents and workers in the locality who might otherwise be driven away. Here, two technical terms are needed. Onerous rates are those which yield no compensating benefit to the persons who pay them. An extreme case is that of rates devoted to paying interest on a loan incurred by a municipality for an enterprise which failed and has been abandoned. A more representative case is that of a poor rate levied mainly from the well-to-do. Onerous rates tend, of course, to drive away those persons on whom they would fall. On the other hand, beneficial or remunerative rates are those spent on lighting, draining, and other purposes, so as to supply the people who pay the rates with certain necessaries, comforts, and luxuries of life, which can be provided by the local authority more cheaply than in any other way. Such rates ably promptly and honestly administered, may confer a net benefit on those who pay them, and an increase in them may attract population and industry instead of repelling it. Of course, a rate may be onerous to one class of the population and beneficial to another. A high rate spent on providing good primary and secondary schools may attract artisan residents while repelling the well-to-do. Services which are preponderantly national in character are generally onerous, while those which are preponderantly local in character generally confer upon ratepayers a direct and peculiar benefit more or less commensurate with the burden. Note 66. But the term ratepayer needs to be interpreted differently in regard to different kinds of local expenditure. Rates spent on watering the streets are remunerative to the occupier, but of course, those spent on permanent improvements yield only a part of their return to him. The greater part accrues in the long run to the landlord. The occupier generally regards the rates which are collected from him as forming a single aggregate with his rent. But he makes his reckoning also for the amenities of life, which are secured by remunerative local expenditure of rates. That is, he tends, other things equal, to select districts in which the aggregate of rents and onerous rates is low. But there is great difficulty in estimating the extent to which migration is actually governed by this consideration. It is probably hindered less than is commonly supposed by ignorance and indifference, but it is much hindered by the special requirements of each individual. Low rates in Devonshire will not draw there people who prefer London life, and certain classes of manufacturers have practically little choice as to the place in which they settle, to say nothing of personal and business ties. The tenant is further hindered by the expense and trouble of moving, and if that were the equivalent of 2 years' rent, he would lose by moving, unless the advantage which he secured in rates amounted to 2 shillings in the pound for 30 years. When, however, a person is changing his abode for any reason, he is likely to allow their full weight to all considerations as to the present and prospective rates in different localities, which may be suitable for his purpose. The mobility of the working class is in some respects greater than that of the well-to-do. But when rates are compounded, friction sometimes acts on the side of the tenant and delays the transference to him of his share of new burdens. The manufacturer is often affected as much by the rates on his workmen's dwellings as by those on his own premises. And though high rates may be among the causes which have driven some manufacturers out of large towns, it is doubtful whether, when economically administered, they have had much net effect in this direction. For most new expenditure from the rates, when under able and upright management, materially increases local comforts or lessens local discomforts from the point of view of the work people, if not of the manufacturer himself. Further, although the balance of evidence goes to show that lessees consider carefully the present and probable immediate future of local rates, yet they cannot see far ahead, and they seldom even try to do so. Note 67. Any analysis that is offered of the incidence of rates must be taken to refer to general tendencies rather than actual facts. The causes which prevent these tendencies from being applied in prediction resemble those which prevent mathematical reasonings from being applied to the course of a ball on the deck of a ship that is rolling and pitching in cross seas. If the ship would but stay at one inclination, the movement of the ball could be calculated. But before any one tendency has had time to produce much result, it will have ceased to exist, and its successor cannot be predicted. Just so, though economists settled once for all, nearly a century ago, the general tendencies of the shifting of taxation, yet the relative weight of onerous rates in different places often changes so rapidly that a tendency may make but little headway before it is stopped or even reversed by changes which cannot be predicted. Paragraph 2. We have already seen that the ground rent which a builder is willing to pay for any site is governed by his estimate of the additional value which that site will give to the buildings erected on it. Before taking the lease, his capital and that which he will borrow for the purpose is free and expressed in terms of money. The anticipated income from his investment is expressed also in money. He sets on the one side his outlay for building, and on the other side, the excess of the rental value of the building, with its site over the ground rent to which he is about to commit himself. He works out, perhaps roughly and by instinct rather than definite arithmetical calculations, the present discounted value of this excess for the, say, 99 years of his lease. Finally, he takes the lease if he sees his way to a good margin of profit and no better opening for his enterprise is at hand. Note 68. He contrives to the best of his ability that the site and the house or other building which he puts upon it shall be permanently appropriate, the one to the other. Insofar as he succeeds, the rent of the property at any future time is the sum of its annual site value and the annual value of the building. And this he expects to yield him full profits on his outlay, allowing for insurance against the risks of a rather hazardous industry. This second part of the rent is commonly, though perhaps not with strict propriety, called the annual building value or the building rent of the house. As time goes on, the purchasing power of money may change. The class of house for which that site is suitable is likely to change, and the technique of building is certain to be improved. Consequently, the total annual value of the property at a later date consists of its annual site value, together with profits on the cost of building a house, giving accommodation equally desirable at that date with the existing house. But all this is subject to the dominant condition that the general character of the house has remained appropriate to its site. If it has not, no precise statement as to the relation between total value, site value, and building value can be made. If, for instance, a warehouse or a dwelling house of quite a different character is needed to develop the full resources of the site, the total value of the property as it stands may be less than its site value alone. For the site value cannot be developed without pulling down those buildings and erecting new. And the value of the old material in those buildings may be less than the cost of pulling them down, allowance being made for the obstruction and loss of time incident thereto. Paragraph 3. As between two buildings, equally eligible in other respects, the occupier will pay for that which has the better situation, an annual sum equivalent to its special advantages. But he does not care what part of this sum goes as rent and what as taxes. Therefore, onerous taxes on site values tend to be deducted from the rental, which the owner or lessee receives, and they are accordingly deducted insofar as they can be foreseen from the ground rent, which a builder or anyone else is willing to pay for a building lease. Such local rates as are remunerative are in the long run paid by the occupier, but are no real burden to him. The condition in the long run is essential. For instance, rates levied on account of interest and sinking fund on a town improvement, which will for several years to come disturb the public thoroughfares and yield none of its good fruit, will be onerous to the occupier if he pays it. In strict justice, it should be deducted from his rent, because when the improvement is in full working order, and especially when the debt has been paid off, so that the rate in question lapses, the owner of the property will reap the benefits of the onerous rates levied on account of it from the first. Note 69. Paragraph 4. Taxes on building values are on a different footing. If uniform all over the country, they do not alter the differential advantages of favored sites, and therefore do not, directly at least, make the builder or anyone else less willing to pay a high ground rent for a good site. If they are so heavy as materially to narrow the area of ground built upon, they will indeed lower the value of all building ground, and special site values will fall with the rest. But their effect in this direction is so small that no great error is made by saying that uniform taxes on building values do not fall on the ground owner. The building, insofar as he anticipates such taxes, adjusts his plans to them. He aims at putting up buildings of only such expense as can be let to tenants at rents that will yield him normal profits, while the tenant pays the rates. He may, of course, miscalculate, but in the long run, builders as a class, like all other able businessmen, are nearly right in their calculations. And in the long run, uniform taxes on building values fall upon the occupier, or at the last on his customers if he uses the building for trade purposes and his competitors are subject to similar rates. But the case is quite different in regard to special high onerous local rates on building values. And here comes in the chief difference between the incidence of national taxes on immovable property and local rates on it. Remunerative expenditure from the rates, which adds more to the conveniences of life than the equivalent of its cost, do not, of course, repel the occupier. That part of them which is assessed on building values is paid by him, but is no real burden on him, as we have seen in the case of remunerative rates on site values. But that part of the rates on building values, which is onerous and in excess of corresponding charges in other localities, does not fall mainly on the occupiers. Any exceptional pressure will cause them to migrate beyond its reach in sufficient numbers to reduce the demand for houses and other buildings in the locality, till the burden of these exceptional rates falls upon the lessees or owners. Builders, therefore, insofar as they can foresee the future, deduct the equivalent of these exceptional onerous rates on building values, together with all rates and taxes on site values from the ground rents which they are willing to pay. But the cases in which great deductions of this kind are made are not numerous and important. For permanent inequalities of onerous rates, though considerable, are less than is commonly thought, and many of them are due to accidents which cannot easily be foreseen, such as mismanagement by a particular group of local administrators. There is indeed one broad and perhaps permanent cause which throws its shadow before, namely the tendency of the well-to-do to move away from crowded districts to roomy and fashionable suburbs, thus leaving the working classes to bear an undue share of the national duties towards the very poor. But no sooner does this evil become conspicuous than legislation is invoked to remedy it by widening the areas of rating for some purposes, so as to include poor and rich districts under the same budget and in other ways. It is of greater importance to remember that exceptional onerous rates on building values, while tending to lower site rents and to lower the ground rents on new leases in the districts to which they apply, are not as great a burden on the whole body of owners of land as seems at first sight. For much of the building enterprise, which is checked by such rates, is not destroyed, but directed to other districts and raises the competition for building new leases there. Paragraph 5. The incidence of a long-established rate is little affected by its being collected from the tenants and not from the owners, though it is vitally affected by the proportions in which the rate is assessed on site and building values respectively. On the other hand, the incidence for the first few years of an increase in onerous rates is much affected by the mode of collection. The occupier bears more of the new burden than he would if part of the rates were collected from the owners, or he were allowed to deduct a part of them from his rent. This applies only to neighborhoods that are making progress. Where the population is receding and building has ceased, onerous rates tend to press upon owners. But in such places, economic friction is generally strong. It seems probable that the total pressure of onerous rates on the enterprise of building speculators and other interim owners is not very great, and that many rates of which they have complained have really enriched them. But vicissitudes of the rates increase slightly the great risks of the building trade, and inevitably, the community pays for such risks more than their actuarial equivalent. All this points to the grievous evils which arise from great and sudden increases in the rates, especially in regard to premises, the rateable value of which is high relatively to the net income of the occupier. The trader, especially if a shopkeeper, is often able to throw some part of the burden of his rates on his customers. At all events, if he deals in things which cannot be easily got from a distance. But the shopkeeper's rates are very large relatively to his income. And some of that expenditure from the rates, which is remunerative from the point of view of well-to-do residents, appears onerous to him. His work belongs to that group in which economic progress is raising supply relatively to demand. A little while ago, his remuneration was artificially high at the expense of society. But now it is falling to a lower and perhaps more equitable level, and he is slow to recognize the new conditions. His mind fastens on the real injustice which he suffers when rates are suddenly raised much, and he attributes to that some of the pressure on him, which is really due to deeper causes. His sense of injustice is sharpened by the fact that he does not always bargain on quite even terms with his landlord, for to say nothing of the cost of fixtures and the general expense of a change. He might lose a great part of his custom by moving to equally good premises, even a little way off. It must, however, be remembered that the shopkeeper does migrate sometimes, that his mind is alert, and he takes full account of the rates. And thus, after a few years, he shifts the burden of onerous rates onto the owners and customers more fully than a man of almost any other class does. Parenthesis open. The hotel and lodging housekeeper may rank here with the shopkeeper. Parenthesis close. Appendix G, continued, of Principles of Economics. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Principles of Economics by Alfred Marshall. Appendix G, continued. Paragraph 6. Land near to a growing town, which is still used for agriculture, may yield very little net rent and yet be a valuable property. For its future, ground rents are anticipated in its capital value, and further its ownership is likely to yield an income of satisfaction outside of the money rent received for it. In this case, it is apt to be underassessed even when rated at its full rental value. And the question arises whether it should not be assessed at a percentage on its capital value instead of at a percentage on its rent. Such a plan would hasten on building and thus tend to glut the market for buildings. Therefore, rents would tend to fall and builders would be unable to take building leases on high ground rents. The change would therefore transfer to the people at large some part of the public value of land, which now goes to owners of land that is built upon or is likely to be built upon. But unless accompanied by energetic action on the part of urban authorities in planning out the lines on which towns should grow, it would result in hasty and inappropriate building, a mistake for which coming generations will pay a high price, and the loss of beauty and perhaps of health. The principle which lies at the base of this scheme is capable of larger application, and something may be said as to one suggestion of an extreme character, which has recently attracted some attention, to the effect that in future rates should be assessed mainly or even wholly on site values with little or no reference to the value of the buildings. Its immediate effect would be an addition to the value of some properties at the expense of others. In particular, it would raise the value of high and expensive buildings in districts in which the rates were heavy, even more than those in which they were low, because it would afford relief from a greater burden. But it would lower the value of low obsolete buildings on large sites in heavily rated districts. After a time, the amount of building put upon a site would vary generally, subject to the bylaws, with its advantages of situation, instead of as now, partly in proportion to these advantages, and partly inversely as the rates. This would increase concentration and tend to raise gross site values in advantageous districts, but it would also increase the aggregate expenditure from the rates. And as this would fall on site values, the net site values might be very low. Whether on the whole the concentration of population would be increased, it is difficult to say, for the most active building would probably be in the suburbs, where vacant land no longer escaped heavy rating. Much would depend on the building bylaws. The concentration might be much lessened by a rigorous rule that there should be a large free space at the back as well as in front of all high buildings. Note 17. Paragraph 7. Reference has already been made to the latent partnership between tenant and landlord in British agriculture generally. Note 17.
Thank you, Alfred. All right, everybody. Now it's time to close this seance by doing our banishing ritual. So we're going to be sending Alfred Marshall's spirit back to the depths of hell. Spirit be gone till I call you forth again. In our next seance / YouTube video / blog talk radio show, what have you. Okay, hey, ladies and gents. All right, so now we're going to talk about timely top stories in the world of finance, and also the caller lines are wide open. If you'd like to call in and be a part of the big show, got about an hour left. So that number is 657 383 1825. That's 657 383 1825. Caller lines are wide open, so feel free to call in, talk about anything. I just don't care, man. It's a customer service related show. The customer is always right. The listener is always right. The audience member is always right. So whatever direction you'd like for the show to go in, please, like I said, feel free. Give us a call. All right. Once again, that's 657-383-1825. Got about an hour left. Okay, now. Timely top stories in the world of finance. Okay, coming at you from the fine folks at Fox Business. Walgreens, Boots Alliance, buyout. We talked about this the last time on the show, a couple nights ago, I do believe, 2 days ago. Let's see here. Oh, looks like we got a little video. Do we? Do we now? Do we have a video? Let's see what's going on here. Hello. Maybe. Let's see. Stop it. Let's see.
Investors can overlook the mid-cap sector. Join us and watch The Middle Bias, created by State Street Global Advisors, home of MDY, the mighty mid-cap fund.
Okay, wait a minute here. Wait just a damn minute. Yeah. Got a little video here. So this actually might be a little bit more entertaining than my ugly ass. So, I mean, if you're watching on YouTube, but also if you're listening on Blog Talk, it's pretty radio friendly as well, I believe. So, let's see here. Hello. Dale. Daylight come and we wanna go home. Come on, baby. Load up already. Come on. Come on. Come on, come on, come on, come on, baby. Come on.
I'm Elizabeth Banks, and I'm back
Ooh,
with State Street
yeah.
Global Advisors to find out
Look at that eye candy.
why investors can overlook the mid-cap
Eye candy, ladies and gentlemen.
sector. Join us and watch The Middle Bias, created by State Street Global Advisors, home of MDY, the mighty mid-cap fund.
Before investing, consider the fund's investment objectives, risks.
Yeah.
targets,
Come on already.
This and other information. Call 1-866-787.
You can't even steal material off the internet anymore. I remember you used to be able to steal shit off the internet all the time without the ads. Okay, here we go. Fox
There's
Business.
growing support in California to buy out PG&E, the utility under scrutiny after devastating wildfires and intentional blackouts. A group of mayors backing a plan to turn PG&E into a customer-owned company. PG&E filed for bankruptcy earlier this year due to an estimated $30 billion in liabilities from those wildfires. Walgreens going private? Sources tell Reuters the drugstore chain has held preliminary talks with major private equity firms. Walgreens is not commenting right now. The deal would be the largest leveraged buyout in history. And the holidays are coming to Starbucks. The coffee giant unveiling its holiday cups. This year's designs are polka dots, Merry Dance, Merry Stripes, and Candy cane stripe. Starbucks reusable limited edition red cup is also returning. In New York, I'm Tracy Kowalski.
What is this? A fucking commercial for Starbucks? Come on already. All right, look. Okay. All right. Look, I gotta say the audio. Right, sorry, the audio on that totally sucked, but the eye candy involved was almost worth it, But the eye candy, and the info babes, right, almost made up. Oh, come on, for the bad audio. Hello. Oh, come on already. Okay, what's going on here? This thing is effing with me big time, man. Okay. Okay. Start. Okay. Daylight come and me wanna go home. Daylight come and I wanna go home. Day-o, day-o. Well, man, that was a big cluster F. Sorry about that, ladies and gentlemen. That was just horrible. Okay, moving on from town to town. But, dang, Fox has got some info babes. Do they not? Fox Business? Info babes. Walgreens Boots Alliance is looking at a massive windfall if it's taken by a private equity firm. Okay. The retailer.
I'm Elizabeth Banks, and I'm back
Right.
with State Street Global
Oh, God.
Advisors to find out
Okay.
why investors can overlook the mid-cap sector. Join us and watch The Middle Bias.
God damn, you're being coming in. All right, look, honey.
Home of MDY, the mighty.
All right, you're starting to annoy the shit out of me now, okay? The retailer, which operates the nation's second largest pharmacy chain by prescription drug revenue, could see the biggest leveraged buyout in history, valued at an estimated $85 billion. Private equity firm KKR earlier this week approached the retailer about a go-private deal, Bloomberg reported on Monday. Both Walgreens and KKR have declined to comment. So, Walgreens shares spiked on the news before settling at $62.25 a share on Wednesday, giving it a market capitalization of about $55.6 billion. However, JP Morgan Chase analyst Lisa Gill says a go-private deal could value Walgreens at a much bigger premium. In a note sent to clients on Tuesday, Gill said, or it's Gill or Jill, I'm going to say Gill, said a deal could imply a maximum transaction value of $85 billion, which would imply an equity value of $74.97 per share. She based the valuation on a debt ratio of 6.5 times and other financial metrics. Such a valuation would be an approximately 21% premium to Wednesday's share price. Oops. At $75 a share, Walgreens would still be 15% below its 52-week high of $86.31 set on December 4th. All right, Walgreens shares have been under pressure over the past year as the company has suffered from falling margins and slowing sales as it competes against Amazon, CVS, Aetna, and other rivals such as online pharmacies. Kroger and Walmart are also fierce contenders when it comes to the grocery business. In the company's second quarter earnings statement out April 2nd, CEO Stefano Pessina blamed continued market challenges and macro trends for the most difficult quarter since the formation of Walgreens Boots Alliance. U.S.-based Walgreens merged with Alliance Boots in December 2014 in a deal that combined the nation's largest drugstore chain with Europe's largest pharmaceutical wholesaler. A Walgreens Boots Alliance Go Private deal would mark the second time that KKR has done business with the drugstore chain. In 2007, KKR reached a $22 billion deal for Alliance Boots, creating the largest leveraged buyout in European history. All right, that same year, KKR partnered with Texas Pacific Group to do a $45 billion deal for the utility TXU Corporation, the largest leveraged buyout in history. Walgreens shares are down 8.2% this year. Okay, let's see here. Oop. All right. I'm going to take a very quick break here. All right, we're going to have a few words from Argentina. The ladies with Femina coming at you, ladies and gentlemen. Be right back after this. Oh. Whoa.
Wish you had a battery that lasted longer than lunch.
Yeah.
Order up. It's switching time. There, that's better. Switched up to 12 hours of battery life. Switch to Chromebook. Click to four.
De decoro ignoro, mejoro en calidad si demuestro mis modos, si no escondo entre los hombros mis dolencias.
Con entre los hombres sus dolencias.
Calidad viene de herencia, mil caras me miran, mil caras, como si me entrevistaran, preguntarán, ¿qué más escucharán?
Dolencias de un bacán.
Macanas,
Macanas.
un falso, un balbucear sin nada, una mirada y un escudo de escuadrón, sobrepasando el horizonte de mis límites con guerra y estrategia. Hiriente el maricón, pero mi fuente fértil, desabrigada en lo más sutil, más alineada esta compadrona. ¿Puedo referirme a mí?
Claro que sí,
Yo no me pianto por un puerín. Se dice de mí, mi se dice, deshice de mí, se di de mi ser exhibir. Desnuda ante ti, si soy o si fui así como así, yo soy así. Yo soy así. Yo soy así. Yo soy así.
Fresca y ornamentada peina los ruidos, la bronca barrida borrado el bajo suspiro. En rezo el ramo seco saca su pecho y lo muestra en concierto.
Concéntrase la audiencia, laten con fuerza los tímpanos, su lengua rompa segmentos, fragmentan frases, sus pensamientos. Alma de viento, descontenta, desconcierta el timbre ajeno, el ajeno de algunos propios, el agujero resuelto en lo obvio, un robo, un novio, la necedad de borrarse en otro, la carencia refleja hielo, el objeto quieto, la vanidad es un reto, cualquier incompleto encuentro. Tengo cuentos sin argumento y personajes sin historia, relaciones sin momento y recuerdos sin memoria. Tengo cuentas sin crédito y senos sin espesura, aunque mi logro sin mérito a guerra voy, sin armadura. Se dice de mí. Se dice, desiste de mí, se di de mi ser exhibir. Desnuda ante ti, si soy o si fui así como así, yo soy así. 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 Soy así.
All right. Thank you, ladies. All right. So, moving on, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, God, not her again. No. No. God, leave me alone. Leave me alone. Damn, that lady is annoying. Okay. Okay. Let's see here. Moving on. Got Bitcoin? U.S. Fed warns national debt growth is not sustainable. Oh. What? Come on. Got Bitcoin? All right, Cointelegraph coming at you from the fine people at Cointelegraph, the future of money. Granted, this article, it may be a bit biased. I don't know. If I feel like it's a little too propaganda-ish, I'll move on. But they definitely have a reason to push the fear because, they want people to invest in Bitcoin. So, right. Hey, all right. Let's see what they got to say. The head of the United States Federal Reserve has admitted current economic policy is not sustainable, but that it is not its job to fix it. Speaking during testimony before Congress Joint Economic Committee on November 13th, Jerome Powell noted that currently U.S. national debt is growing faster than nominal GDP. Powell, solving debt spiral not up to the Fed. Okay. Then what exactly is your job, Powell? Okay, well let's let's look further, shall we? Ultimately, in the long run, that's not a sustainable place to be, he said, Powell. Powell continued, how to fix that? It's easy to say that. How do you do that, and when do you do that is an issue that is up to you and not to us. What the heck is this? No. Oh, okay. Not to us. As Cointelegraph reported, U.S. debt has now topped $23 trillion, around $70,000 per head of the population, or more than $1 million for each Bitcoin that will ever exist. On the night of November 14th alone, the Fed distributed funds to banks worth 12.7 million BTC, while its balance sheet is expanding towards $4 trillion. For Powell, however, resolving the debt crisis simply means making growth beat debt. And even failure to do so would not equal chaos. I would be remiss in not pointing out that the consequences of not addressing it is just that our kids and grandkids will be spending their tax dollars servicing debt rather than on the things they really need, he continued. Trump wants negative interest rates. The comments came as U.S. President Donald Trump renewed calls for negative interest rates, effectively charging savers to store flat currency, and criticized the Fed for not introducing them. Remember, we are competing with nations who openly cut interest rates so that now many are actually getting paid when they pay off their loan. Who ever heard of such a thing? Give me some of that. Give me some of that money, he said in a speech to the Economic Club of New York. Okay, well, now that when he puts it like that, I sort of agree with him. At first I was thinking, well, that's how I sort of agree with him when he puts it like that. I mean, if we're competing with other nations, what's good for the goose is good for the gander, right? Right, so debt-driven economic policy and its consequences were the main motivation behind Bitcoin, BTC, which appeared after the 2008 economic crisis as hard money with a deflationary supply impossible to manipulate. Bitcoin is increasingly compared to gold as a hedge against the constant erosion in the value of flat fiat currencies. Okay, moving on. Next story. What's going on here? Let's see. What's going on with this stuff? Let's see what these boys have to say. Mm-hmm. Okay. What's going on here? See what these boys have to say.
Got Bitcoin? U.S. Fed warns national debt growth is not sustainable. The head of the United States Federal Reserve has admitted current economic policy is not sustainable, but that it is not its job.
Oh, okay. I just heard that. Okay, so what's going on here?
I'm Giovanni, and today with us, prominent trader and YouTuber Eric Round. and CEO at Bitpool Capital, Joe Di Pasquale, who will be discussing the latest crypto market updates. Hi guys, how are you doing?
Hey Gio, good to be back here. Good to meet you, Joe, and pleasure to be back here, man.
Great to talk with you guys.
Let's talk about the price first. So Bitcoin is currently hovering around the 8,000 benchmark, and the outlook is not looking good according to most analysts. Joe, in a recent interview with Forbes, you identified the key support now at 7,750, which, if it breaks, would potentially cause Bitcoin to go as low as 6,000. Do you still believe so?
I do, Giovanni. Let me show you a quick analysis I did on TradingView. We see that about a week or so ago, we saw 2 weeks ago, we saw the price drop. Then what we see here is Bitcoin trying to break out of this descending triangle. The 7750 line you're talking about is this blue line here. We did see the price kind of rise in the last day, try to break out of this triangle, but instead of being able to really break this resistance line or have this resistance line become a support line and continue to grow, we're seeing the pressure kind of be too much for Bitcoin to break out of. So I do see, yes, my prediction is that the price of Bitcoin will continue to fall down into this descending triangle. And if it breaks 7,500, yes, I do believe that we're in trouble and it could go down to 6,000, to answer your question.
Great. And Eric, how do you see these predictions? Do you agree with this kind of analysis?
Yeah, I think my numbers would be a little bit different. I can share my screen right now, but mostly the same, realistically speaking. To me, the most important area for Bitcoin is this blue moving average right here. That's the 377 exponential moving average, which is very, 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 very important for long-term trend identification. If we do break this, which is a little bit above where Joe was saying, I'm at about 7850 region, then I consider this as redistribution right here, and we're getting ready for the next markdown. I'm not sure if I would directly target like 6,000 if we broke that region. I do believe it'd be more appropriate to take it one step at a time. I do believe that we probably find a nice little bouncy bounce somewhere in this pocket right here between about 6,900 to 7,100 region, back down from our middle of May lows. In fact, what's really interesting to me is looking at a corollary of Bitcoin in GBTC. We already do see GBTC kind of taking that next leg down. We saw the same consolidation right here at what would be the $8,000 level, and GBTC broke it to the downside already as of a couple days ago. And we actually have seen GBTC precipitate these moves on Bitcoin plenty of times in the past over this last few years. So what does make me think, or what does make me continue to be bearish here, is not only just price action structure, but GBTC showing the kind of way as well. As long as we're below this white moving average, that's 200 moving average, I'd be looking for continuation essentially. And going back to Bitcoin right here, for myself, the way that I think about it as a trader isn't necessarily that we're 100% going down to this next level. I need to see this level first broken at about let's call it 7,900. I'll say. And I would kind of maintain this as overall more bearish as long as we're below 8,700. That's where all these major moving averages kind of converge right here. That's the 200 simple, that's the 200 exponential moving average, and that's the yellow 20 exponential moving average right here, which price action had a pretty awful rejection from it over the weekend, right? So to me, that tells me that the bots and algos within this market are angled to be on the sell side of this equation. And if they are, what this kind of precipitates into is, well, if we take off everything but these two moving averages right here, this is we're gonna be looking at a depth cross between whether you're looking at exponentials or simples. Exponentials are the green 55 and the purple 200. Those are on a collision course as long as we're below about 8,700, putting more and more downwards pressure on price action. That probably happens in the next week and a half if those do cross. And the simples will cross sooner than that. They'll probably cross in the next like week, I'd say, assuming that we do stay below 8,700. So both these things would be pretty damning for long-term price action. And that's what I do think, Bitcoin likely does break down. Does it hit that $6,000 level? I don't really see too many other things in $6,000 level. I think actually if it breaks below about 6,900, I think that will actually be headed significantly further down towards mid to low fives. But at that point, we're kind of splitting hairs because we're realistically looking a lot lower if that were to happen. So I think we're kind of on the same page for that. Absolutely.
So recently, Bloomberg quoted Jeff Dorman Chief Investment Officer at ARCA, who said that with volumes still quite low relatively to this summer, shorts are incentivized to keep pushing price lower until they hit resistance. So do you agree with this analysis, and where do you see a possible resistance?
So because Bitcoin is in a general downtrend, we do see people, investors, the sentiment amongst the investors I speak to is more of a short sentiment, depending on the type of investor, of course. So that perpetuates this cycle lower and lower, and till the people will not stop shorting until there's a bullish sign, and right, an event which we could think of, interest rates dropping more or more trade wars or other things that might be a catalyst. Although in the short term, I think, things like Zuckerberg's testimony to Congress next week is a bearish sign. So what I would be wary of, though, as an investor is a short squeeze, because if Bitcoin does, let's say, as both Eric and I predict, go down to 77.50 or 75, we're going to see a short squeeze, perhaps people trying to cover their shorts, buying Bitcoin, the price shooting up, and perhaps people getting in trouble because they're not able to cover their shorts or get washed out of their shorts. So, but yes, I do continue to see this trend of shorting until there's bearish news, bullish news, and that could even be, we see the halvening next year or something else like that. There's a number of reasons that bullish news could happen.
Mm-hmm. Eric?
Yeah, so as far as levels that I'd be watching, assuming that we do break down here, because it's always probability until we actually, do take out that 7850-ish region. I'd be looking at, first and foremost, the 6,800 to 7,000 region as a first potential area. And then I'd be looking at, actually, let me pull up my screen right here. This is going to make a lot more sense with an example. And then I'd be looking actually much lower after that. So the next levels to me also just gained off of the volume profile right here, showing a little bit of activity at the high 6,000 region. Then again, if we pull it out a little bit more, after that, realistically, fives and fours is kind of where I'm looking towards. Even then, on a weekly, the major moving average that I'd be looking at down around that region is the 200 exponential moving average right here. That's going to be protecting price action somewhere right around 5,400. But this all again comes into the conversation if those next levels get hit. So I always take it one step at a time as a trader. I am not in any way, shape, or form saying that Bitcoin's definitely going down to 5,000 or anything like that. I think if we take the next leg down, 6,800 to 7,000, you treat it as potential reversal. When it happens, see if there's any sort of divergent sign, see if there's any sort of lost momentum, and then if the bounce fails, like we've seen for the last couple months, then you can start targeting those next levels. So that's what I'd say about that. As far as the director of ARCA's statements, it's a little bit. I'm a little bit unsure of what it sounds like what he's saying. Shorts are going to continue to short until it's not profitable anymore. Which, yeah, I agree with. I mostly agree with that.
Despite the pullback in price experienced by Bitcoin since last June, the Chicago Mercantile Exchange claims that institutional investors' open interest in their Bitcoin futures remains strong. And it's actually over 60% higher than a year ago. So, Joe, what is the logic institutional investors are following? Are they accumulating on dips?
Well, I have kind of a multi-pronged answer for you. So, yes, you're exactly right. Do institutional investors, want value? Do they accumulate on lows? Absolutely. So that's when we see their accumulations. But as Eric was saying, the volume, the volume has been low recently. So even amongst these lows into the 7Ks. So yes, the institutional investors I speak to are accumulating on these dips. That's absolutely happening, whether it's through GBTC or direct purchases of futures or Bitcoin itself. I still, from
Buy in the dip, everybody.
I speak to, see a lot
Buy
of
in the
interest in
dip.
accumulating Bitcoin at
The
low
institutional
points.
investors are.
Still, I think, we've seen the relatively soft launching back and other products, and there's just a lower volume in this moment than I think would be a good sign otherwise.
Mm-hmm. And Eric, what do you think about it?
Right. So when he's saying that, it doesn't necessarily imply that those people are buying, right? When we're talking about trading going on, they could be also shorting, they could be also selling. That still counts as a trade. That still counts in the volume
Fair enough.
metrics. So when he says something like that, it's direction neutral. It doesn't really tell you too much about that.
Fair enough, bro.
Unfortunately, what I can say though is about bigger accounts. If I pull up this right here, this was a pretty interesting study done. I want to give credit to this is Glassnode on Twitter. I don't know him personally, but pretty damn cool that he put this out. And this is the amount of Bitcoin addresses holding more than 1,000 Bitcoin in their wallet. So we can effectively say these people are, these are whales in a sense. This is around like $10 million or more. And the number of wallets has been drastically rising, right? Which you would think is a good sign, actually, which it is long-term a good sign. But for the short-term price action, think about it. Big accounts are not going to be accumulating during an uptrend. They're going to be accumulating during the downtrend. That's when they are essentially people who put in the low. These institutions here, deal with big amounts of money. And you'll notice that every time that this gets accumulated a lot more, every time that we see a massive dramatic rise in this, that precipitates pretty massive drops, actually, which is kind of the counterintuitive thing, at the outset. But when you really start to think about it, of course, whales are only going to be accumulating when price action is coming down. That's the whole idea. And they're going to be distributing when price action is going up. So you see during 2016 to 2018 right here, we actually lost a few, of those bigger wallet addresses. So overall, this would suggest that yes, bigger players are accumulating, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we just stop and reverse from this exact moment right here. I mean, I just want to point my attention back towards this first major splurge in late 2018, which I'm sure everyone probably remembers was during October, November. A lot of people on YouTube talking about this, but just a few days later, Bitcoin got halved. It went from 6,000 to 3,000. Essentially, and so it wasn't until we saw those walls start to go sideways again where we actually did put in the low. So I would say it's correct, but actually the implications of it are kind of backwards in a sense.
So according to a recent Bloomberg article, Bitcoin is no longer seen as the driving force in the crypto market. The article reports the data by alternative data provider Indexica, according to which the Bitcoin drop due to the growing cryptocurrency ecosystem, such as emerging new cryptocurrencies and blockchain technologies. Do you agree with this analysis? And why would a growing crypto ecosystem cause Bitcoin's price to drop? Shouldn't it be the opposite?
I guess I'll start. I completely disagree. Bitcoin's dominance this year has grown. It's at 66% of the total crypto market cap. So I don't see any sign of Bitcoin not being the dominant force in crypto. It's recognized by the CFTC and the SEC as a commodity. There's ETF attempts. It's going to continue to be the dominant crypto asset. There's others, so I disagree.
Mm-hmm. Eric?
I'd 100% disagree and 100% agree with Joe here. So I'll share my screen once again. Anyways, to say that the crypto ecosystem is growing would imply that the total market cap would also be expanding as well, going up. What do we see here on the total market cap? Well, first, the presupposition is wrong. We're not growing right now. We're actually coming down. We're having a little bit of a downtrend. Anyways, if we actually look at the index for altcoins, which the exchange FTX has actually put together so nicely for us, we can directly look at altcoins and then kind of compare it to Bitcoin and see what pops up. So I would ask that you go into this with a clear mind, and we'll just pull up the first one. This is the altcoin perp index on a weekly, straight down. Bitcoin perp index on a weekly, straight down. Shitcoin perp index on a weekly, straight down. Now, admittedly, there's not enough price action history here, but compare all these charts, which are pretty much the same, with Bitcoin's price action from the last few weeks. And you can see that there's a stark contrast. So I don't believe that that's correct. I also believe that Bitcoin is the ecosystem, and Bitcoin does fail. I don't think that bodes well for any cryptocurrency, really. Could things change in the future? Could we see like the next, major technology emerge? Perhaps yes, but I don't think that we've seen it, thus far. And Bitcoin's still kind of the king. And Bitcoin, Bitcoin comes down here. I expect everything else in this market to come down, as much or more.
I completely agree with Eric. And Eric, you reminded me that just the macro sense that people in crypto have is the flight to safety is often, if not to dollars, then to Bitcoin. And so right now, when Eric talks about shitcoins and other things, we've seen just such soft action on the alternative coins. Their prices just generally lowering and lowering and lowering. It was big news this week when Ethereum broke 170, which is such a low for it, and just holistically. So there's Bitcoin is, especially amongst the fund managers that I speak to or invest in, they are often going from the alternative coins to Bitcoin, but then holding Bitcoin. They're not short it. They're holding it in this moment.
My general view on altcoins goes something like this. I don't really care about altcoins to begin with, but there's probably going to be some absolutely phenomenally successful altcoins. Do I know what they are? No, I don't really spend my time, looking at them. But there are a few that stand out right now. I think Link actually has been for like the last year and a half. I have no idea what this thing does, but just this chart completely stands out from anything else. And there's a few other ones, but realistically, what I'm looking for when looking at alts, when people ask me on like a stream or something like that, is I want to see a chart that's not in like a 2 to 3 year just straight downtrend. If it doesn't look like that, it's probably okay, and it might stand the test of time.
Link is amongst some interesting projects that people like. Its blockchain interoperability, Chainlink. And so people also like projects like, let's say, Polkadot or Cosmos, which ticker is Atom. And those, the ones that, Eric, you're talking about, are some of the darlings amongst those who do altcoins and believe that altcoins will rise again. So that's, I think, why we see Chainlink rising, or Atom has a lot of price movement. It's, again, in the last few months been relatively soft. It was at $5 at one point. Now it's under $2.50, let's say. But those blockchain interoperability projects are really some of the stronger altcoins. And the other things I'd say that people are looking for in altcoins would be maybe some of the exchange tokens like BNB, Binance Coin, and possibly you mentioned Litecoin or other chains with a lot of really fast transaction speed. So Stellar would be one of those.
So you probably heard that the launch of Ton, Telegram's cryptocurrency, which was scheduled for the end of October, will be delayed to April next year because it's considered not compliant with the US regulations. So Telegram is ready to give back 77% of the money to investors who don't agree with the new deadline. So what does this delay mean for the investors, and what impact is going to have on the launch?
Giovanni, in your question, I sense some, maybe this is bad news for investors. Honestly, I've been bearish on Telegram since early 2018 and quoted as such in many places, just kind of warning people away from the project. It always was an order of magnitude larger than, or much larger than anything we'd seen in crypto. It was the hypiest of hyped ICOs. If I were getting my money back and I had been an investor in Telegram, which I'm not, I would be very happy about it because I am not bullish on its prospects even when it launches. So take the win of getting your money back, I would say. Is yeah, that's my view on Telegram.
I would agree. It's very noble of them to give back the money that they probably didn't have to. Anyways, yeah, man, I'm right there with you. I think that this kind of sets a precedent for the general space. If you actually are on the radar of the SEC, most of these projects are probably not compliant with FINRA or the SEC or whoever their jurisdiction falls under. So I think the SEC just kind of targeted Telegram because they got so big, as Joe said. But I would expect this same results for any other altcoin any other ICO that did a similar thing of the same magnitude. So it kind of tells me that the SEC is not really concerned about all these smaller projects. But if you do get pretty big, they're certainly going to knock on the door, which I think is right, and I think that's it makes a lot of sense realistically.
Mm-hmm. But some people are saying that this delay could actually give an advantage to the investors that can negotiate. No, I mean the point is the idea is that because of the delay, investors can have more time to maybe negotiate a better deal with Telegram regarding the price that they paid. But
if that's their general goal, they will have a chance to do that. Absolutely. I would just argue that it's kind of irrelevant at the end of the day. Whether they get stopped again by the SEC or whether the project just completely flops on its face, as do most altcoin projects, I kind of see it as a blessing in disguise for a lot of those people.
If you just look at, sometimes you have to extrapolate from crypto into, the real world, even if technology can be considered a real world. Telegram raised billions of dollars, right, on something that doesn't exist. This TON token does not exist.
1.7 billion.
Yes. So if you just extrapolate that to any other company that does exist, let's just say Facebook, when it first raised $1 billion, it was a major company that had major traction. So maybe they can renegotiate. Well, we'll see what the future holds, but I don't think that it had to be a pretty low valuation for me to be interested, given that it's not actually a product or a thing yet.
Mm-hmm. So do you share the same opinion, the same kind of negative opinion of Facebook's Libra?
Well, I mean, Libra and TON are completely different because Libra is a stable coin, first of all, that will be tied to the value of a basket of fiat currencies like the dollar or other major currencies. And its use is mainly for an in-network transaction that Facebook and other companies will be championing. The other stakeholders will be accepting it. So unlike TON, which is a blockchain project, it's not a stable coin, Facebook's Libra will, I think, have mass adoption. And yes, TON can be used within Telegram to send money and things like we see with almost WeChat. But I think Libra is stable and much more has much more promising industry connections and is doing things in a much different way.
Mm-hmm. Eric, do you agree?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, Libra's trying to go the legal route. They're trying to be the legitimate route, whereas TON just kind of went forwards with it and said, well, we don't really know what the SEC is going to say, but we'll take your money anyways. So Libra is very interesting to me because I do think that Libra's success actually does help Bitcoin. I know a lot of people are going to really hate that statement, but let me explain.
Okay.
This last run that we saw at the upside, a lot of it was kind of in line with just the optimism around Libra and around all these partners kind of signing on with Libra, of which, of course, a few just left, right? Some big names as well, right? Like Visa and PayPal and a few others. So to me, this is kind of like a pivotal moment for Libra in a sense, because it has the opportunity to make itself anti-fragile. If it survives this, if it survives, having these companies leave it and still goes forwards and does what it set out to do, or just gains its legitimacy and actually operating, I'd say that's actually a pretty damn strong signal for the whole space, just cryptocurrencies in general, because it takes out one more step from getting, from Libra, which is kind of like a more mainstream, mass adopted thing, I'd imagine, with everyone using Facebook. Yeah. And allows that money to flow a little bit easier into cryptocurrency, because from what I understand, Libra actually would trade against Bitcoin. At least a few exchanges were looking at listing it from what I've heard.
So basically, you see all those supporting companies leaving the project as a positive sign, because the project itself will be acquiring some increasing degree of autonomy from all of them, and it will become more.
It's not a positive thing in and of itself. It's a positive thing if Libra persists and actually can go ahead with what they want to do. If they become successful, that makes them anti-fragile, and they're not dependent upon those companies, which I think a lot of people, myself included, would put those companies in pretty high regard. So it'd be very impressive to see Libra succeed in the face of that, which would in turn make me more convicted on the strength of the crypto ecosystem in a whole, because it's all going to be connected essentially. And I'm sure most people here, like myself, know once money enters the space, typically it doesn't leave.
Here with us today was Eric Round, prominent YouTuber and trader, and Jody Pasquale, CEO at Bull Capital. Thanks a lot, guys, for participating, and see you next time.
Thank you for having us, Giovanni.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And it's been a pleasure to speak with you, Giovanni, and an absolute pleasure to speak with you, Joe. This has been amazing, man. So thank you.
I agree, Eric. I'm looking forward to continuing to talk.
Cointelegraph. Like,
Okay.
subscribe,
Thanks, boys.
and hodl.
Hello. Thank you, fellas. Wow, that was a very, very informative discussion, definitely on blockchain technologies. Bitcoin, to be more precise. Actually learned a few things about how the Libra is going to affect Bitcoin, and I like what I heard, I must say. Okay, moving on. From town to town. Okay, ladies and gents, got about 6 minutes left in the show. If you want to call in, caller lines are still wide open. That number is 657-383-1825. That's 657-383-1825. Give us a call. Be a part of the Big Shoe. All right. Moving on. Hindenburg Omen and Ohama Titanic Syndrome form in a key stock market index. I have no idea what any of that means. Okay. Coming at you from the fine folks at Market Watch. The ominous sounding chart pattern crystallized in the NASDAQ and has presaged market. Presaged markets. Oh, come on already. Hello. Market corrections. Come on already. Oh, I hate this thing. I hate you. Oh, this website is infuriating. Maddening. It's maddening, I say. Maddening. Okay. Dark storms looming in the NASDAQ composite by Mark DeCambre. A pair of ominous patterns are forming in the NASDAQ benchmarks, which could signal that a stock market climb fueled by a hoped-for tariff detente between the U.S. and China may be starting to unwind, or at least stall out. Analysts at popular blog as Sentiment Trader note that for the first time in months, on Wednesday, the NASDAQ Composite Index negative 0.04% simultaneously triggered a so-called Hindenburg omen and an Ohama Titanic syndrome. Okay. Named after the German dirigible that notoriously exploded in 1937, the Hindenburg omen is formulated to predict market crashes or severe downturns by synthesizing data, including 52-week highs and lows, as well as stock moving averages on the New York Stock Exchange. In this case, it is forming in NASDAQ-listed stocks. The omen was created by Jim Mieka, a blind mathematician, marksman, and teacher. A blind marksman? What? How does that work? Who died several years ago. Mieka claimed that his indicator had been an accurate predictor of every market crash since 1987. I know blind people can do some miraculous things. What do they do? Put a bell on a target, I guess? I've never seen anyone do that. Separately, the spooky-sounding Titanic syndrome was coined by Bill Ohama in 1965 and is viewed as a preliminary sell signal. Prominent chart specialist Tom McClellan has told MarketWatch in the past that when lows surpass highs within 7 trading days of a one-year peak for an index, an Ohama Titanic syndrome signal is triggered. Hello. Oh. Jason Gopfert, head of Sentiment Trader and founder of independent investment research firm Sundial Capital Research, told MarketWatch that for his purposes, he used the following conditions to help determine whether... Okay, ladies and gentlemen, well, we're going to have to cut that short. This is the end of the big show. I want to thank you all for tuning in. Just a reminder to everyone out there that the Rant with Charles Lamson is completely audience supported. To donate, please send cash, check, or money order by mail to Charles Lamson, 1203 Fox Chase Drive, St. Charles, Missouri, 63301. Once again, that's send your cash, check, or money order payable to Charles Lamson at 1203 Fox Chase Drive, St. Charles, Missouri, 63301. You are the fuel that keeps this machine running. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Until the next show, don't take any wooden nickels.